Yes, thank you. Now, let us move on to data table as an object. How to manage data table as an object. So here I come to now QTP. You notice now there is a data table below in this QTP screen. This data table I am now going to treat it as an object. When we seen data table before as a parameter, so the data table as a parameter we have seen. Now we are going to see data table as object. Let us, for understanding this, first if I put data table here, if I put a dot, you can see now these are all the methods and sub objects available under data table. Wherever you see a green color, all these are methods. Wherever you see a hand symbol with a letter in a hand, that is properties, right? And these are what is now supported, methods, and there are some properties supported. Using this, how we access data table. Indirectly, this substitutes your excel.application object. Create object excel.application can be replaced using this. Advantage of using data table instead of excel.application is in excel.application you need to manage the controls by yourself. Here data table itself uses the same Excel controls, but he given it as an object to you. When I say object, object means it is a collection of sub objects. It can have class, it has its own methods. So that is what you are going to see here. I can trigger this data table using step generator because it is a third party, it is a QTP object. Insert step generator, it is an utility object. Under utility object you can see data table as well as object. So here you can see what is the actions you can perform, methods that you can adopt. Now let us take this data table object. Before I start, let me create 3-4 actions. Our aim of this data table object is I have a global sheet, I have an action sheet. I know from action 1 I can access global as well as action. If I create another action or another 2 actions, action 2, action 3, action 1 cannot access action 2 and action 3 by default a data table as a parameter. Now we also see using this, I create now multiple action. I am creating action 2. I create one more action, action 3. Now my aim is I have a global, I have a sheet, I name the sheet as GLB global DT the GLB. In that sheet I call here G1 global data 1, global data 2, global data 3. I have 3 rows of data. Action 1 I create another some rows. I create here yes dt underscore act1 action 1 column name. Under this column let me create global G4 G5 as well. Under action 1 let me create AC1 AC2 AC3 AC4 There I have 5 rows, here it is 4 rows, and action 2 also I create now, dt act2 action 2 column name. Here act b1 b2 b3, I have 3 rows. So I have created global sheet 5 rows, action sheet 3 rows. Here I'll use A1, A2, A3, A4. Action 2 sheet I have 3 rows. In action 3 I want to write the product of all this combination, that is G1 into A1 into B1. I want to concatenate G1 A1 B2, G1 A1 B3. I want here to populate like this, A1 B1, G1 A1 B2, G1 A1 B3. I want to do this through scripting for all the combinations into the data table, right? In reality, it doesn't have any meaning, but what we are trying to understand here is how I can manage my data table, rows, columns, how I iterate multiple rows, how I move the pointer while I execute without using default iterations. File settings, we all know this is our default iterations. I don't want to use this default iterations. I want to make it as here run only one iteration, but still I want to manage all the rows, columns that is available, and I want to write it on the third action, my result. I am just trying to complicate what I want to do. I am deleting all the rows of third action. I am making it here column name of third action as ACT3. So aim is all the combinations I want to concatenate of global action 1 and action 2. Write that value in action 3. So I will now know how to read from individual actions and how to pass the value inside the third action using data table as an object. This is what we are trying to see now. I am making it as a non-reusable action. It is not mandatory, just to get the practice of whichever action is not reusable, let us make it as non-reusable. Now, let us start data table as an object. First thing to do this is, I need to retrieve from global sheet how many rows are there. Today it is 5, it can be 10, it can be 12 as well. So during runtime, I need to know how many rows are there in global sheet, action 1 sheet, action 2 sheet. This first I need to collect this information to iterate, because I need to go through all combinations. So I need to understand the count of rows in each of the sheet, global sheet, action 1, action 2. So retrieving, I am putting the comment in the top. Retrieve the row count from global, action 1 and action 2 using data table object. So how to do it? When I like to do that, first is I need to assign it to a variable vglb row count, vrcglb global sheet equals data table. When I give data table dot, whatever you see the first action, say for example I have get row count. If I want to get row count of global sheet, the data table dot get, this get pertains to global sheet. If I don't use any subsheet, I am using directly data table dot get. This get command or set command acts on global sheet. That is first understanding. I am now passing the row count of global sheet into the variable called v underscore row count underscore glb. Please note here, the data table, whenever I directly give get commands of data table object, it retrieves information from global. It is also applicable for setting some value. Now VRC ACT1, I want to retrieve action sheet row count. So data table dot. Now I cannot use get row count. I need to now go inside the sheet. I need to first get sheet. Inside that get sheet, I need to go inside the data sheet. So method get sheet, give the sheet ID. Sheet ID now either you can say 0, 1 or I can give the action 1, that is the sheet name as my ID dot. Now what I am trying to do is retrieving action 1 row count inside a variable v underscore rc. Here I say get row count. The previous version of QTP doesn't support method available within a get sheet. It is available, the IntelliSense doesn't appear in QTP 9, 9.5 etc. Now I have now retrieved in action. Now I am in action 3. You can note that I am in action 3. From action 3, if I use data table as parameter, I can retrieve only global sheet and action 3 sheet data. But with this method, I am trying to retrieve action 1 sheet as well as action 2 sheet. So now VRC underscore ACT2 data table. Now I retrieve row count of action 2 sheet dot get row count. I am passing those to a variable. So this is done. First is we arrived at count of each of the sheet. Global, action 1, action 2. My next job is I need to read from row 1 of global sheet and I need to read action 1 row 1, then action 2 row 1. I keep on iterating, complete all the rows of action 2 first for global first row, action first row, then global first row, action second row, run through all the rows of action 2. So I need 3 looping. First loop is for global sheet, second loop is for action sheet, third loop is for action 2 sheet, because I need to iterate through all the combinations. To do that, first I create a for loop because I know what is the row count. For I equal, I start from 1 to till which row I need to go, my RCGLB. This is my row count I need to iterate through. Step, it is 1, so step statement is not mandatory. Now I created a loop. What is my next job? I am into now global sheet. I have created a loop. This loop will iterate through all the rows. To iterate all the rows, I need to now move the pointer. When I execute, you might have noticed there was a dark line in data table parameter, you might have noticed. This pointer I like to move or set when I iterate through global sheet. Usually this is set by file setting run on all rows. That guy will set the pointer as he iterates each iteration in global sheet. Now we are not going to use QTP iteration mode. So we are forcing now to set the pointer. Why I need to set the pointer? Reason is only after setting the pointer I can access now row 1. If I set the pointer at 3, I am accessing now row 3. For that I need to set the pointer. Setting the pointer is done now using again data table as an object dot set row current row. Which is the current row? I is my current row. I am setting now row 1 as my first pointer. Then I need to retrieve the value of G1, value of column DTGLB inside one variable. I like to retrieve now I pointer is pointing to row 1 now. Column DTGLB, I need to retrieve the value of row 1. Automatically from this column he retrieves the value as G1. How to do it? There are several ways I can do it. Say for example I make it as var1 equals. I can use this command data table bracket column name DTGLB followed by DT global sheet now. This is by default available. This is data table as a parameter. You can use this as well. But I like to use different method using data table object. Then var1 equals data table. I want to retrieve value. I give value. From where you want to retrieve value, I need to retrieve value. This is now parameter ID is nothing but column name. DTGLB is my column name, followed by from which sheet I need to take this column. You take it from global. It has to be in string. So data table dot value followed by column name followed by which sheet I like to retrieve the value. This gives or assigns the value from global sheet first row inside variable var1, because current set row sets the value on the first row. Now in this first row, whichever column you like to retrieve, give the column name as a parameter ID using data table dot value command. Then from which sheet you want to retrieve, give the sheet name. He retrieves that column value. If I iterate next row, I becomes 2. When I becomes 2, column is same. Now pointer will be here and he retrieves now G2. Pointer decides from which row he has to retrieve the value. If I don't use this row number 6, line number 6, then the pointer remains at first row. So he doesn't move to second row or third row. So moving the pointer is the most important concept, and understanding relationship between the pointer and the column, how he retrieves the value of different rows of that column. So having finished this, now I retrieved G1. My next job is go to action 1, use first row of action, retrieve the value. Since I need to iterate through all the rows of action, I am creating one more loop, that is say J loop. For J equals 1, 2, v underscore rc underscore act1 is my row count of action sheet. Again, for this action, I need to set the row. So to set the row, data table dot get sheet. First I need to get the sheet. On that sheet, I need to now set current row. Which row? J is my row. So this command, line number 10, in action sheet he sets the row, which row he has to access. This was not possible using data table parameter. Data table parameter has an access to iterate only on global sheet and action 3 sheet. He doesn't have a control on action 1 or action 2 sheet. So after I did this, I need to set the value. I use var2. Now I cannot use data table of this method. Action 1 followed by dt local sheet I cannot use because dt local sheet points to action 3 sheet. Either I can use dt local sheet or I can use dt global sheet. Both are not allowed. So I cannot use this data table parameter. I am forced to use now value method. Using value method, I can access any column dt act1 followed by action sheet name action 1. This allows me to retrieve the value from action 1 sheet of row 1. When this J loop iterates through, he will retrieve from all the rows the value and stores the value to the variable. Next, I am going to the action 2. Similar way, for k equals 1 to v underscore rc underscore act2. Next, I need to set the row data table dot get sheet followed by call sheet name action 2 followed by set current row, say k. Then I need to retrieve the value var3 data table value command followed by column name dt act2 followed by action 2, which sheet I want to retrieve. In case column name doesn't exist, the name that you are given, there is a difference, it is case sensitive, it will generate an error. Now I retrieved var1, var2, var3 with row 1 of global, row 1 of action, row 1 of action 2. I retrieved all the value. If I don't set the row, then by default QTP will access the first row. QTP will go to another row only if I have my iteration set under file settings. This is how default QTP moves the row count. Whereas here in our case, we have set this action or action 3. It is set for only one row. You can notice it over here. By default, run one iteration only. Action 2 is also set for one iteration only. This is meant for action 2 sheet. Action 3 meant for action 3 sheet. Action 1 meant for action 1 sheet. So here they are all pointing to the first row by default. Now my aim is I want to manage data table as an independent guide. I like to iterate the row using data table as an object. So it allows me to set the row. The row is setting the pointer. So this pointer is important candidate if I have to retrieve the values of the column. we will see when I execute, we will notice this how the pointer is being moved. My next aim is from in action 3 I want to set the value. When I setting the value for each of the combination, I want him to write in each row. I don't want him to overwrite on the first row. If I have to do that, first is I don't know how many rows it will generate. It is basically global sheet row count into action sheet row count into action 2 sheet row count. That is the total count of records that will get generated. But assume that I don't know how many rows he will create. My aim is to write each of the combination in one row. To do that, my logic says assign a counter. I assign a counter. I make a command setting counter to increment row count in action 3 sheet. So I say v underscore rc equals act3 equals, or I say r act3 equals 1. I am setting it 1. That means first time he has to write it on the first row. So under k, this is the loop where we have set. In this loop, I now have all the first row value. I need to write this value into the third sheet. So I need to set in third sheet action in data table setting the row get sheet get row set row of third sheet with what? With I used v underscore r underscore act3. This variable is now holding value 1. That means in AC3 I set with row 1 now whatever the value that I want to pass. Now I set the row for A3 action 3. I am now assigning the value that using data table again. I can now use like this act3 dt local sheet. This is allowed valid equals. All this time you might have noticed only taking the value from the data table. Now we are assigning value inside the data table without output value method. So data table local sheet, I want to use the value var1 concatenate var2 concatenate var3. I have now set the value of first row of action 3 sheet with concatenation G1, A1, B1 in the first iteration. For next iteration, I need to increment the count act3 equals v underscore r underscore act3 plus 1. I am incrementing now act3 with one more. So when he iterates the second row, he will iterate with row number 17. He will set the row, pointer will be moved. I am going to execute with a breakpoint so that we understand clearly how he executes. I am applying a breakpoint under third loop so that we exactly notice how the pointers are moved. We will also move between first sheet to the last sheet, that is global sheet action 1 action 2 as he iterates through. I run the script. Now we have made it ready. I run the script now. Here no objects. The objects are data table object. expect an identifier. Okay, I made a mistake in action 1. I remove this line. I run again. So action 1, action 2 is empty. We kept those actions for having sheet. Action 1, it will skip, it will go to action 2. Action 2, it will skip, it is now moving on to action 3. I have not applied a breakpoint. I think applied. Let me see. So for I equal to 1, he is now setting. For I equal to j, that is also been set. Now he is into k. He is now waiting for the user command. If you go inside the variables, you can see how the variables are set. That is fine. No issues. I now move on to the call, that is sheet. In sheet, you might have noticed now is onto pointer is onto first row. So in sheet, pointer is onto first row, and sheet 2 I have to move to sheet 2. Now I am in action 1. Right. Now I am in action global sheet. Again it is pointer is onto first. Action 1, pointer is onto first. Action 2, pointer is onto first. Action 3, pointer is onto first. I F11 to execute line by line. I am into K1. K1 is setting the action to first row is set. Now you can see the value of first row is being pointer is there. Then action 3 is setting the row count. It is first row. Now you can see as I click, line number 18 will set the value onto the first row of action 3 sheet. Now incremented, or action 3 is now incremented. It is now going to the next. So K loop second iteration. Now if I click F11, you can see now for action 2 sheet, he is moving the pointer to the next row to retrieve value of column in second row. Otherwise he cannot retrieve column value of second row. I think this makes you clear how pointer is being moved in the data sheet. Now he is setting the value in second row of action 3 sheet. If I don't have line number 17, he will write it on the first row itself, overwrite the value. So you will notice now he is now pointing onto the second row and writing the value, the combination in the second row. Same way he now continues for all the values. I now go to the, let me finish off this K. He is writing now, fine. Now K is over. He is now moving on to incrementing J now. So J has become 2 now. You can notice that the action 1 sheet, the pointer is now moved to second row. So pointer moved to the second row indicates, or it is done by row number 12. Line number 12 sets the pointer of action 1 sheet. I click, I go to K. Now you can see again it is starting from row 1. He is now setting the value, right? Because the loop always starts with 1. He is now A to B1, he is setting the value. So I hope now you understand what is the importance of setting the row and importance of how we use data table dot value and how we use sheet command. Now if you have multiple columns, you can use column names. You can use this method for even managing your bug sheet in a XLS file or some data that you have dynamically generating through script. I want to store that data in Excel sheet. I can use this commands. Now what I have not done is exporting this value into the so-called XLS file. That is called export command. Data table is purely an XLS object. So he is now into A4, that is the last value of global action 1 sheet. Now you can see it is now pointing to row number 2 of global sheet because you have now moved that I counter. I is now set with 2 and that is why he is moved to the second row of global sheet. He is now going to execute from first row all the rows in action sheet. So I remove the breakpoint, I click on run. So it will now continuously execute without our intervention. But you can see in the sheet the way the rows are being moved. Now he is into action 2 B2 K loop. He is typing that value. So for all the combinations he will now start entering the value into the sheet. This is one of the major advantage of data table as an object. I can move over any sheet I like to. I can retrieve value from any sheet I like to. What I need to do is I need to know the column name from which I need to retrieve the value and row number from which I need to retrieve the value of that column. So once I know this, we can manage data table as an object. Very useful command in terms of bug reporting, in terms of common data stored in the XLS file. I want to use it in my test cases. I can use this file. So how we do those is by using export and import command. We'll see that as well after this run completes. I stop this run. Let me know where it stands. Meantime, any queries can be asked. I am stopping the run. I don't want to proceed with all global data. Global data we have 5. So I am stopping my run. In report, we notice how the report manages the data. You can see in runtime, if you notice, no action 3 doesn't have any data because it's a runtime value. I go to automation, last run results. In last run results, you can see the data table. In data table, you notice now all the values that has got generated is being added to the data table. It's loading now. So it's ready. I click on data table. You can now notice all the values. G1 has 5 rows. Action 1 has 4 rows. Action 2 has 3 rows. Action 3 has n number of rows, 21 rows. Still it is only completed G2. We stop the run in between. So this is how I manage my data sheet using data table object.